Religion is often argued through doctrines, defended by logic and measured by belief. William James chose a different path. He listened to experience. In the Varieties of Religious Experience, James turns away from institutions and looks inward. To mystical states, sudden awakenings, quiet surrenders, and moments where the rational mind loosens its grip. This is not theology. It is psychology at the edge of transcendence. Here, consciousness stretches beyond intellect. Truth is felt before it is understood. And meaning arises not from belief, but from lived inner reality. Today we explore where reason ends and experience begins. Part 1: The Threshold of Experience, the Divot. At self, there are moments in life when the familiar fabric of reality loosens. The surfaces of things, the common meanings, the rational outlines, begin to shimmer as though something behind them were quietly breathing. William James called this the religious experience. Not a creed, not a doctrine, but a direct feeling of the unseen order. It begins often not with light but with a question. A subtle disturbance in consciousness, as though the rational mind, long the sovereign of our inner world, had started to sense the presence of something it cannot fully contain. James approached the matter not as a theologian, but as a psychologist of the soul. He wished to understand the living texture of faith, the way it feels in consciousness, not as abstraction but as immediate experience. For him, religion was not merely belief in an unseen power. It was the sense that beyond the shifting field of our personal life there lies a deeper reality, a current of meaning in which our individual existence participates. He called it the sense of the unseen, and recognized it as one of the profoundest faculties of the human spirit. But what is this unseen? And why does it awaken in some and not in others? James, with his gentle empiricism, refused to draw sharp lines. He saw the mind as a plural field, layered with regions above and below the daylight of reason. Our normal waking consciousness, he wrote, is but one special type of consciousness. Beneath it, and perhaps beyond it, lie other forms of knowing, separated from it by the filmiest of screens. Through dreams, visions, sudden intuitions, or the simple deepening of inward silence, these other modes may break through, flooding the ordinary with a sense of vastness and intimate presence. In these moments, the intellect falls silent. The self, that habitual interpreter of life, yields to something larger. The experience may come as joy, as illumination, or as a strange terror, for the familiar boundaries of I and world dissolve. Yet in that dissolution there is also revelation. Something in us recognizes that what we call self is not final. There is an inner life that transcends the personal narrative, a consciousness that sees through us rather than being confined to us. For James, this insight was both psychological and spiritual. The mystical state, he suggested, is not a violation of nature but an expansion of it. It reveals that our ordinary mind is a narrow channel through which only a fraction of reality flows. Beyond its walls lies the larger consciousness, the ocean from which our thoughts and feelings arise like waves. Religion, then, becomes the attempt of the finite mind to relate itself to that infinite source, to surrender the illusion of isolation and to rediscover itself as part of the whole. And yet, the path to that rediscovery is rarely serene. James observed that the human being is often divided against itself. Beneath the calm surface of daily life, the soul is restless, haunted by its own incompleteness. The intellect seeks order and clarity, while the heart longs for communion and meaning. The conflict deepens until a kind of inner crisis is born. The divided self, torn between what it knows and what it feels, between what it believes and what it senses might be true beyond belief. This division, James saw, is the beginning of transformation. The soul that suffers its own split is the soul that begins to awaken. For only through the breakdown of the old unity, the identity held together by reason and habit, can a deeper unity emerge. The mystics, the saints, the converted, they are not born whole, they are made through dissolution. They pass through the night of the soul, through doubt, fear, and the collapse of the familiar world, until a new light dawns from within. James wrote of those who, having reached the end of their own strength, discover another strength beneath. It is as if the conscious mind, exhausted by its own striving, finally sinks through its own floor, and in that falling finds rest in a deeper consciousness. He called it a second birth. The will surrenders, but life itself does not end, it opens. The individual feels touched by something infinite, and the brokenness that once seemed unbearable becomes the very passage through which grace enters. From a psychological view, this is the emergence of the subconscious or the higher self, the reservoir of energies that the conscious ego cannot command but from which it can receive. From the Vedira view, it is the silent witness awakening within the dream of form, the the timeless self recognizing itself in the play of human suffering. Both perspectives meet in the same moment of recognition, that what saves the human spirit is not greater control but greater surrender. In this surrender, the rational mind is not destroyed but transfigured. It becomes a servant to something larger than itself, a channel of the living intelligence that breathes through all beings. The religious experience, then, is not an escape from reason but the widening of reason's horizon. It is the realization that knowledge, to be complete, must include silence, that consciousness, to be whole, must remember its source. James saw in these awakenings not the pathology of illusion but the psychology of transcendence. They reveal that human consciousness is capable of states that dissolve the boundaries between self and world, inner and outer, mortal and divine. And in those moments, fleeting, inexpressible, yet unforgettable, the soul knows what philosophy can only name, that behind the many varieties of experience lies one radiant field of being, silently watching through every mind that seeks it. The unifying vision, the fruits of the spirit. When the divided self begins to heal, the change is not merely intellectual. It moves like light through the entire structure of being. What once was broken starts to rearrange itself around a new center, a center that does not belong to the old I, but to something vast and impersonal that quietly includes it. William James called this state the unifying vision. It is the moment when the fragments of the self fall into silence, and an inward harmony begins to rise. Mystical consciousness, he wrote, carries 4 marks. It is ineffable, noetic, transient, and passive. These are not mere poetic traits, but the psychological fingerprints of transcendence. Ineffability, because language cannot contain it. Noetic quality, because it brings a sense of knowing more real than knowledge. Transiency, because such moments come and go like a fragrance on wind. And passivity, because they cannot be summoned by will, they come as gifts. In the stillness of such experience, the boundaries of thought grow transparent. The senses, the body, the very shape of awareness become filled with something immeasurable. One feels not as if perceiving an object, but as if being perceived by the infinite itself. The mind is quiet yet luminous. The heart opens yet without sentiment. There is no longer the struggle of subject and object, only the radiance of being aware, awareness aware of itself. James, though a man of science, did not flinch before this mystery. He studied the testimonies of saints, visionaries, and the quietly illumined, those whose lives had been overturned by an encounter with the Absolute. He listened to them not as a skeptic or a believer, but as a psychologist of the spirit. He saw in their words the same pattern repeated across cultures, faiths, and centuries, a movement from separation to unity, from fear to trust, from striving to surrender. And always, at the center, a sense of liberation. The soul that once felt imprisoned within itself now feels held by something infinitely greater. A presence, a peace, a power that does not belong to the self yet moves through it like breath. It is what the mystics call union, but James, ever pragmatic, saw it as a transformation of energy, a redirection of the whole personality around a higher axis. The conversion is not an escape from life but a return to it with new eyes. What distinguishes these experiences, he said, is their fruits. For James, truth in religion was never an abstract claim, it was the living consequence. If the mystical vision does not ripen into love, compassion, and strength, then it remains only a private ecstasy. But when it transforms the habits of life, when it produces serenity amid suffering, clarity amid confusion, humility amid power, then it reveals its source as something genuinely higher. Saintliness, he wrote, is the moral expression of the mystical sense. It is not moralism, not adherence to law, but a spontaneous radiation of goodness that arises when the heart is freed from self-concern. The saint acts not from obligation but from joy, not to please but to share what overflows. This is the fruits of the Spirit: charity, patience, purity of heart, and above all, peace. A peace that passes understanding because it is not made by understanding. In these lives, James found evidence that consciousness, when unified, releases hidden reserves of energy. The person once weary and divided becomes capable of extraordinary endurance and gentleness. The nervous tension that once ruled them dissolves, replaced by a quiet intensity, the soul's steady flame. He saw in this a law of the psyche, that the highest vitality is born from surrender, not control. When the self ceases to resist life, life begins to move through it freely. And so, the mystic, the saint, the transformed, they live not in withdrawal from the world but in its deeper rhythm. Their joy is not always visible but it is continuous. Their faith is not an idea but a condition of being. In them, the divine has become psychological reality. They have crossed from belief to vision, from striving to stillness, from self-consciousness to presence. James, with his philosopher's precision, refused to define the divine, yet he honored the testimony of those who had known it. For him, the variety of religious experience was the variety of human consciousness reaching toward its own infinite ground. The differences of faith, symbol, and culture were only the diverse languages of one universal process, the awakening of the finite mind to its eternal depth. Such awakening, he observed, is fragile. The mystical vision fades, the ordinary returns. Yet something remains. Once the higher consciousness has touched the mind, even briefly, the center of gravity shifts forever. Life is no longer seen as mere succession of events, but as a continuous communication with the unseen. The world itself becomes translucent, like glass through which another light is shining. And from that light arises a quiet certainty, not dogma, not belief, but the direct knowing that all things are connected, that beneath the discord of appearances there moves an intelligence both tender and immense. It is this knowing, silent and wordless, that the mystics called divine union. It is this peace, radiant and alive, that William James sought to understand with the tools of psychology and the reverence of a pilgrim. To him, these experiences were not anomalies but revelations of our hidden nature. They showed that consciousness, at its deepest, is continuous with something greater than the personal mind, an unseen order that breathes through all existence. And in touching it even for a moment, the human spirit rediscovers its home, the unbroken field of being where the many become one, and the one speaks through the many. This, then, is the true fruit of the spirit, the mind made whole, the heart made clear, the self made transparent to the infinite. And though the vision may pass, its echo remains in every quiet act, every generous thought, every still moment where the soul remembers itself as the light behind experience. Beyond the intellect, the pluralistic universe within. There comes a point on every inner path where thought itself begins to thin, where the intellect, which once seemed the light of all understanding, starts to reveal its own shadows. Reason, so proud in its clarity, begins to notice the spaces between its words. Those moments when meaning seems to arrive not by analysis but by grace. William James stood precisely at that threshold, looking with one eye toward science and the other toward the ineffable, asking whether the intellect can ever truly know what it most deeply seeks. To him, reason was a noble tool but not the final authority. It is like a lamp that illumines only what falls within its circle. Beyond that circle lies the rest of reality, silent and immeasurable. The rationalistic mind, he wrote, is a closed mind. It constructs a world that makes sense but not necessarily one that feels alive. The mystic, on the other hand, moves beyond the intellect, not by rejecting it but by letting it rest. They learn the deeper gesture of surrender, where knowing ceases to be an act of grasping and becomes instead an act of being. This, James called the overbelief, not belief in the sense of dogma, but an intuitive trust that reality is larger than logic can map. It is the mind's quiet consent to mystery, the willingness to stand before the infinite without reducing it to categories. The overbelief, he said, is not the enemy of science but its completion, for science tells us what is, while this deeper intuition hints at what is possible beyond our current measure of the real. In those who awaken to it, the intellect does not disappear. It becomes transparent, a clear instrument through which the higher consciousness can flow. One thinks, but thinking is now lit from within. One sees, but seeing includes the unseen. There is no conflict between reason and mysticism when both are understood as modes of the same awareness. One analytic, the other synthetic. One dividing to understand, the other uniting to behold. The deeper truth, James discovered, is that consciousness is not a fixed entity but a field. A living pluralism of many currents and levels, coexisting and interacting beyond our surface awareness. The rational mind occupies but one region of this vast domain. Below it lie the subconscious depths, where memory, feeling, and intuition stir like unseen tides. Above it lie those transpersonal heights that mystics have glimpsed as illumination. Between and beyond them, there are channels, thresholds, and subtle crossings where energies from one region flow into another. In his lectures, James called this the pluralistic universe. It is a universe not of separate things but of living relations, an unfinished whole, endlessly in communication with itself. Every consciousness, he said, is like a window into that larger life. Through each of us the world becomes aware of itself in a new way. The mystic is simply one in whom that window opens wide. This pluralistic vision changed everything. It replaced the rigid architecture of the mechanistic cosmos with something fluid and participatory. Reality was no longer a closed system but an open process. a field of consciousness in which even matter and mind are two languages of one unfolding intelligence. In this view, individuality is not illusion but instrument. Each self is a unique aperture through which the infinite plays its own variation of being. Such an idea dissolves the loneliness of existence. We are not isolated fragments floating in an indifferent universe. We are expressions of an evolving totality that includes us as parts of its own awareness. Each moment of insight, each act of love, each quiet intuition is the universe remembering itself through us. James felt this deeply. Though he spoke in the language of psychology, his heart moved in the rhythm of revelation. He understood that human consciousness is a doorway, not a product of the brain alone, but a participation in something vaster. When the mystic experiences unity, it is not hallucination but direct contact with this larger field. The varieties of experience are not contradictions. They are the many ways in which the infinite reflects itself in the finite. This pluralism does not deny truth, it multiplies it. There is not one single way to the divine, but countless approaches, each shaped by the soul that walks it. The scientist, the artist, the lover, the saint, all are translators of the same unspeakable presence into different languages of experience. What unites them is not doctrine but depth, the sense of a life beyond the self, flowing through every form, binding the many in one vast communion. In this understanding, even conflict becomes creative. The tension between intellect and intuition, science and faith, reason and mysticism, these are not opposites but polarities within a greater unity. They keep consciousness dynamic, alive, capable of growth. Just as light needs shadow to reveal its brilliance, so the intellect's limits are what make the mystical breakthrough possible. The rational mind builds the ladder, the transcendent mind climbs beyond it. When James spoke of this, he did so with humility. He did not claim to have crossed into the mystical himself, rather he stood at the threshold, honoring those who had. Yet in his reverence there was participation. He knew that to truly understand such experience, one must let one's own consciousness stretch toward it. And so his psychology became something more than science. It became a meditation on the human spirit's capacity to know itself as infinite. To live within this pluralistic universe is to feel the presence of meaning everywhere. The ordinary becomes transparent to the extraordinary. The smallest gesture, the faintest breath of wind, can feel like a message from the unseen. One senses that the cosmos is not dead matter but living mind, endlessly expressing, endlessly becoming. And through it all runs a single awareness, silent, observing, compassionate, the witness behind all forms of knowing. When James wrote that the visible world is part of a more spiritual universe from which it draws its chief significance, he was naming this very intuition, that behind experience there is experience itself, eternal and indivisible. To awaken to that truth is to discover one's own mind as the meeting place of many worlds, finite and infinite, personal and universal, rational and mystical. It is to see, as the Vedira voice knows, that consciousness is not something we possess but something we are. The universe looks out through our eyes. The eternal listens through our silence. And when the intellect finally bows to that realization, it is not diminished but redeemed, it becomes clear glass for the light of the boundless. The modern mind and the eternal closing reflection. The light behind experience. The modern mind stands amid the ruins and revelations of its own creation. It has mastered matter, measured the heavens, mapped the atoms, and yet, beneath all its knowledge, it trembles with a subtle emptiness. For the intellect, having reached the edges of its dominion, finds itself surrounded by mystery once more. In that mystery, William James saw both the wound and the hope of modern consciousness. He understood that the human spirit, stripped of myth yet starved for meaning, must rediscover its sacredness not in rejection of science, but in its completion. The crisis of the modern soul is not that we know too little, but that we have forgotten how to see what we know, forgotten that knowledge itself is an act of communion. We observe the world but have lost the sense that it observes us back. James spoke to that alienation with a gentleness that still feels alive. He knew that the mystical sense is not an escape from reason but its deep fulfillment. Science dissects the patterns of reality, mysticism feels the pulse that animates them. The two are not rivals but complementary halves of the same intelligence, one moving outward toward form, the other inward toward essence. When they meet, understanding becomes wisdom. And yet, in the speed of modern thought, there is little space for that inward turning. The noise of the world, the endless hum of information, the ceaseless motion of self-analysis, all these veil the simple awareness that underlies them. We are so busy describing experience that we no longer experience. The ancient silence in which all things are known has become almost unhearable. James would have us pause there. He would remind us that the varieties of religious experience are not relics of a superstitious age but signs of what the mind still contains. The mystic, the saint, the poet, the man or woman who feels the unseen presence in a single leaf, they are the forerunners of a psychology yet to come, a psychology that recognizes consciousness not merely as function but as mystery. For the truth of experience cannot be reduced to mechanism. Behind every perception is the perceiver, behind every thought, the vast stillness from which thought arises. To return to that stillness is to recover a forgotten intimacy with existence. A wordless communion that James believed was the ultimate fact of religion. God is real, he wrote, insofar as he produces real effects within us. And those effects are transformation, peace, and love. The modern mind, though skeptical, still longs for these effects. It may not believe in God as object, but it cannot deny the reality of what happens when the heart opens, when the self dissolves, when joy flows without cause. Such states, James insisted, are empirical data, the evidence of another dimension within consciousness itself. They are the soul's natural experiences of its own depth. From that perspective, faith is no longer belief in the unseen but participation in it. The unseen is not elsewhere, it is the inwardness of every moment. It is what looks through the eyes and listens through the silence. When this realization dawns, the wall between secular and sacred falls away. The laboratory and the temple become one space, the field of awareness in which reality contemplates itself. James's pluralistic universe thus finds its home in the human heart. Each person, in their way of knowing, loving, and suffering, is a facet of the infinite's own self-expression. The mystic may speak in symbols, the scientist in equations, the artist in colors, yet all are fragments of the same total experience, consciousness exploring itself through form. The varieties are infinite, but the experiencer is one. This vision, quiet and inclusive, does not demand belief. It invites recognition. It asks us to look inward until we see that the very act of looking is already divine. When the mind grows still, when thought falls away like a garment, there remains something which cannot be doubted, the awareness that is aware of all. That awareness is the eternal witness, the light behind experience. In that light, the boundaries between the sacred and the ordinary dissolve. The breath becomes a prayer. The simplest act, done in clarity, shines with the dignity of the infinite. The divine no longer hides in doctrines but reveals itself in perception itself, in the immediacy of being here, now, awake. James did not claim to possess this vision, he only pointed toward it. But his courage was in the pointing, in giving the modern mind permission to feel again. He showed that the mystical need not oppose reason, that the study of consciousness could lead to reverence, that psychology could become a new path to the eternal. And so, in his wake, the work continues, the quiet reconciliation between the rational and the transcendent, between knowing and wonder. We stand as he did between two immensities, the measurable and the immeasurable. To hold both without fear is the true art of consciousness. In the end, the varieties of religious experience are not about religion at all. They are about life, life seen from its deepest point, where every form, every moment, every thought arises from the same unbroken source. When we turn inward, past language and belief, and listen deeply, we hear it, the pulse of the infinite, steady and luminous, beating beneath the mind. There, the journey of psychology becomes the journey of the soul. There, the intellect bows to its own origin. There, the modern and the eternal are one. And in that stillness, vast, transparent, and endlessly awake, consciousness recognizes its